Hello, hi, welcome back to Success Automation. In this video, going to talk on the exception. What is exception? What is the difference between exception and error? And check exception and uncheck exception, and the hierarchy of a exception. So first of all, we had to understand what is exception. Exception is nothing but something when you execute a code. When you execute a code, some error happen in your code, something happened, like for example you are trying to read some file, or you are trying to read a data from an array, or you're trying to divide a number. So when you divide a number with a zero, that is not the infinite number. Infinity or infinite number is not there in a computer. So in such scenarios you will get an exception. So whenever exception happen, it will give it will stop the execution of program. Like it's like a interrupt the program execution of program without proper information. So when you use exception handling, they have introduced in Java, they have introduced exception handling. By using the exception handling, you can catch the exception and you give the proper message to the user why this exception happened, what is the reason, so that by seeing the error message he can understand what could be the problem of that exception. So I'll just go to an example here. uh, I just written a program. I'll remove this try catch here. So if you see here, I just created one class. Under that one main method, I'm trying to divide the number, and I'm trying to divide the 10 divided by 0. So any number divided by 0 is an infinite number that is not there in a computer. So when you try to run this program, you are not handling any exception handling. You're just trying to run the program. This is one scenario. I'll run this program. So this program will terminate the program, and it will give the generic message. JVM also will give the generic message. So if you read the exception here, exception thread main, arithmetic exception by 0. A general person who does not know Java or who does not understand the programming language, he cannot understand what is the problem. So instead of displaying the general message, you can give your own message, so that everybody can understand. So now to handle this type of scenarios, you need to use try catch. So this try catch, how to do is, I'll tell the syntax here. You have to use try catch. I'll write it here. So you need to write try bracket start and end. Okay, you need to write try block. This is a try block. So this is a try block. Any code which may occur any exception, which may throw some exception, you know that this code may throw exception, or that code you need to put inside this try block. And catch block is like, you have to define, you have to give some message here. Okay, this is catch block. Here in catch block, you can give the proper message. Why this exception happen? Number is number is divided by 0. Try other than other than 0. So you can give some proper message. And some exception happen. Why this exception happen? And you can give the proper message so that the user can understand what is the problem of this code. So when I try to run this program, right click and try to run this program. Now here also, now if you see, the exception happen and it given a proper message. The message what we have given in the system.out.println. Here we have cached this exception and we given the proper message. So like this you can handle the exceptions. So exception may be anything. There are different types of exceptions are there. So before going to the different types of exception, I just want to go through the hierarchy. Hierarchy of exception is very important. If you see here, yeah, if you see the hierarchy of this exception, the top is your object, under that throwable, under throwable there is an exception and error. So under left side if you see exception, you have check exception and uncheck exception. Check exceptions are like IO or compile time exception. Uncheck exception or runtime or null pointer exception. And under throwable there is error. So there is another um, uh, there is another concept like error. So that will come on the right side. So you need to remember this hierarchy. Top is object, throwable, left side exception, and right side error. You need to understand. You need to remember this hierarchy. Now, when we understood what is exception, now we need to understand what is error. Error represent. If you see the definition here, errors represent irrecoverable conditions such as Java virtual machine running out of memory. For example, you have you have a laptop and it's a limited storage is there, and you are trying to run the program, lot of programs. When you run the lot of programs, when the JVM run the program, it will occupy the memory. When the memory occupy more space in your laptop, it will give the running out of memory error. This is error. This is not exception. And stack overflow error, library error, incapital, infinite incursion. Errors are usually beyond the control of a program. This is the errors are not arise or the errors are not coming from the code. It is coming from your laptop, your machine. So that type of errors are nothing but errors. Errors are generally, it is not under the control of a programmer. It is belong to the virtual machine and the laptop. Whereas exception, it can be handled by the programmer or the person who is doing the coding, because his code raised the issue. So if you see here, I am dividing the number. I'm just given the number divided by 0. This is, I created this code. So whenever a person write a code and that code may throw some error that is called exception. So whenever you want to handle exception, you have to use try and catch block. So every try should have catch block. Without catch block, it will give error. See, if you save it, it will give the compilation error. So every every try should have the catch block or finally block. What is finally? I'll tell you. So now, like this, you need to define the exception in your code. Now, if you go, major reason why an exception occur, they have given some example: invalid user input, device failure, loss of network connection, physical limited, all these blah 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 things are there. Now, when you see the difference between error and exception, an error indicate a serious problem that reasonably application should not try to catch. We cannot catch that error. Whereas exception indicate the condition that are reasonable application might try to catch that. Meaning the person who write the code, he can catch the exception. So as I told, as I discussed about the exception hierarchy, that is the hierarchy. The second thing what we need to remember is type of exception. There are two types of exception. Yeah, types. So yeah, one thing is user defined exception that we are going to talk later. Now we talk about the built-in exception. Built-in exceptions are check exception and uncheck exception. Built-in means which are exceptions which are created by the JVM, which is supported by Java. So check exception and uncheck exception. What is check exception and what is uncheck exception? So check exceptions are, for example, when you write this code, when you write this code, I'll show you. I'm declaring one a 10 and a is equal to a divided by 0. So when you try to write a program, well, once you complete the program, it is not giving any compilation error because the number is not divided still. The number when it is divided, when you run the program, it will divide. So when you write the code, if if it does not give any compilation or error, that type of exceptions are check uncheck exception. Sorry, uncheck uncheck exception means at the compile time it is not checking whether this piece of code may throw an exception, because at the compile time it is not giving any compilation error. That is called uncheck exception. Okay, next one is check exception. This is uncheck exception and check exception also. I'll just going to demo. So um, check exception, I'll just check exception as, for example, you are a file object file equal to new file, and you are giving some location of file. So you need to import this file, okay. Now I'll type the check exception code. So here file input string, I'll try to import this. Yeah, if you see here, I have I create I return on file input stream class an object. This is object, and I create the instance of this file input stream, and I given some location. When I put the location here, as I have already imported this file, there is no issue with the import, but still it is giving the error here. If you see here, the red line, it is giving the error. Left side, if you see it, that line number 10 here, red line, because it is it is giving the compilation error and saying that you need to put this code in the try catch, or you can throw it, or it's saying to put in the try catch block. Why it is telling to put in the try catch block? Because you are trying to read a file gfg some text. There may be a chances that somebody, when you write the program, at that time you have created the gfg.txt file, or you written the program and the file was there. When you run the program, there may be a chances that somebody might delete this file. So when somebody delete the file and you're trying to read this file, then it will throw the exception. For that reason, JVM is prompting you to put that code in a try and catch block. This is called check exception. Check exception. Check exceptions are when you write the program at, well, when you compile the program, at the compile time itself, it will give the error if you don't put in a try catch. Those type of exceptions are check exception. At the compile time itself, it prompt you to put in a try catch block. That is called check exception. So any exception which will prompt you at the compile time, it will prompt you error, it will give the error at the compile time, that exceptions are called check exception. We'll see the definition here. So if you see here, exception can be categorized in two ways: building exception or check exception, and unchecked exception. So what is check exception? Check exceptions are called compile time exception because these exceptions are checked at the compile time. This is called check exception. Uncheck exception are when you run the program, then if you try to divide the number with 0, or you are trying to access the array which does not have some value. For example, you have declared one array and you have stored 5 values. When you are trying to access the sixth element at a runtime, there is no sixth element, you are trying to access the element from the array, then those type of exception are uncheck exception. So this is all about uh, exception. And another thing is, another concept is there. So now we talk about error, exception, try and catch, and there is another reserved finally. So what is finally? Why we use finally? For example, I'll try to write the same program. So I'll put this code in a try catch block. I'll update the catch here. Okay. So when you run this program, right click and run the program. So exception happened, and when an exception happened, it came here and printed the value. Assume that I put number 1 here, and I'll put some statement. Exception is not trigger. So when number is divided 1, when run the program, so the exception statement is not executed because the number is divided by 1 now. There is no an exception happen. Because of that, it executed this statement. So when you go there, so if you see the output, it displaying the code which is there in the try block, not the catch block. Why the catch block code not execute? Because no exception happened. When exception happened, then only it will come to the catch block. If not, no exception happen, then it won't come into the catch block. It will execute the next statement. So whenever it executed this next statement, it is printing the value. Exception is not triggered. Okay. Now you divided by number 0. Number is divided by 0, and you're trying to run the program. So number is divided by 0. It is coming to the catch block and printing the value. Number is divided by 0. So in some scenarios, whether exception happen or not happen, you want some code to be executed. That piece of code which you want to execute whether exception or not happen, that code you need to put in the finally block. So this code you see here, finally code, it will execute all the time. So now first what I'll do, I'm dividing the number by 0, so exception will happen, and it should also display this code also. So quickly I'll right click and run the program. So exception happened and it came to the catch block. It printed this value, and it is printing the finally code also, because as I told, finally block code will execute whether exception happen or not happen. Now exception happened, exception statement executed, and the finally code is now. I try to avoid the exception. I'm dividing the number with 1. When number is divided by 1, it won't come to the catch block. Now still when I run the program, so exception not triggered. The exception not happen, because of that this line is executed, and it has executed the final block also. So final block code will execute all the time whether exception happen or not happen. So when we'll use in the real world or real scenarios, when we'll use the finally block means in the scenario where you are accessing, opening the database DB, okay, and executing the query. You are executing some query, okay, you are executing a query. When open database, whenever you want to execute any query, you have to open the database. Assume that you have opened the database and executed query, and because of some reason these queries got stuck, and exception happened. And when exception happened, assume that after after this execute query, you are closing the DB. You are trying to close the DB. So whenever exception happen, it won't come to the close DB code, because whenever the exception happen, it will terminate the code and come out. So assume that in the real world, some millions of users will be using the website, as thousands of users will be using some code or some application, and when millions of users trying to open the database and they got stuck with this execute query, if you don't close the database, then all these database will be open, and it will increase the load on the database. So you'll in real world, people will put this closed database code in a finally block, because if the the execute your query, if success, then also you need to close the database. If something happened to a query, it got stuck, at that time also you want to close the database, because if you don't close the database, it will increase the load of database, and the database may go under crash. The database may crash. So to avoid that, in the real time scenario, all the database, whenever you want to close object and close the database, those those scenarios will be comes under the finally block. That piece of code you'll put inside the finally block. Whenever you put the code database, closing database or closing the object, closing the browser, you want to put you want to execute that code, whether your execution happens successfully or some exception happen, that piece of code you put in the finally block. So you need to remember why we use finally block. So this is all about today's topic. So today I covered exception, what is error, how to handle exception in Java by using try catch, what is finally blocked, and check exception and uncheck exception. This is all about today's topic. Hope you understood. So if you know this much for the automation engineer, that is enough. You no need to go beyond this. You don't need to go for user defined exception and all those things. You need to remember these things because these are the things we are going to use in the automation. This is enough for the automation engineer. Hope you understood exception handling. Please update your comments if you have any queries. Um, I'm going to answer the queries. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and subscribe my channel and share my videos to your friends so that it will be useful for them. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.